Well, was the Russia investigation a hoax? Was it nothing more than fake news? Obviously it was. Joining us now, Michael Cernovich, documentary filmmaker. His latest film, Hoaxed, about fake news, is available at hoaxedmovie.com, an internet powerhouse with millions upon millions of followers. Michael, you need no introduction to this audience. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Jack, and thank you for plugging Hoaxed.
Well, hey,
done quite well.
I want to watch anything you've put out. Before we dive in, tell us about Hoaxed.
Yeah, so Hoaxed is a documentary on fake news produced by a guy who they call fake news. And I love, as you do too, Jack, in life you want to have a lot of fun, and there's nothing more fun than when they call you the fake news guy and you say, well, I'm going to make a documentary about the mainstream media and show that you're actually the fake news people. And that's what we set out to do with Hoax. But we didn't limit it to one aspect of the Trump campaign. We did an entire expose into media going back decades.
Ah, interesting. How far back? How far back did you go?
At least the 30s.
Boy, that's interesting. And so you find consistencies going back 60, 70 years. You find, in other words, 80 years. You find these consistencies of fake news in the establishment media. It's not a product of the last 30 years. This goes back 80 years.
Yeah, it goes back probably hundreds of years. And there was a pithy line I read there by an account, I think, called Amused Chimp. And it's a funny account because it's a chimpanzee that says intelligent thoughts about the world. And it said, if the news is fake, imagine the history. If the news is fake, imagine the history. I got to remember that. That's a good line. Well, all right, let me ask you this Russia thing. Okay, so we have almost a complete, we do have a complete exoneration of the president, which we kind of knew was coming because, I mean, the most Mueller could muster, seeing this in the light most favorable to him, was that he had a statement from Manafort that somehow Manafort had shared campaign data with Russians, which I don't see what's criminal about that. The question I have for you is, how did this get started? What got this out of the box? Was it fake news that launched the crazy investigation to begin with? Yes, it was Plan B. 2 or 3 days before the election, the Clinton campaign cooked up the Russia collusion conspiracy theory, and they had all their media people ready, locked and loaded, just in case. It was their insurance policy, just as Peter Strzok could talk to his lovely mistress, Paramar, about these. The Russia collusion conspiracy theory was Clinton's and the media's insurance policy.
So she just basically, dreamed this up. This sounds like a Sidney Blumenthal special or something. Did they just pull this out of the air? I wonder how they came to focus on Russia. Was it because they knew that Trump was friends with Putin, so they just picked Russia and they said, we'll build a fantasy novel about Russia?
Well, it's more interesting than that. The Clinton campaign was actually colluding with Ukraine. And this is 100% fact now. The stories are finally coming out. And Politico, to their credit, reported on this story about a year and a half ago. Here's the thing, Jack. As good Americans, we like to grill out and have barbecues and enjoy our lives. We don't realize that we're just pawns in foreign influence operations. So Ukraine says, well, Crimea belongs to us, and the Russians annexed it. How dare they? And meanwhile, I don't care, man. I'm sorry for whatever. But then again, the Crimea was ethnic Russian, so there's more to it than that. So the Clinton campaign just said, well, we colluded with Ukraine. Why don't we just change the name to Russia because we hate Russians, and we'll blame Russia and accuse the Trump campaign of everything that we actually did with Ukraine. And for them, then it was an easy conspiracy theory to create. All they had to do was accuse the other side of what they were doing and change one name from Ukraine to Russia.
Unbelievable. Okay, let me ask you this. As we look at this, what do you think should happen to Mueller? Do you think there's, Larry Klayman has alleged, and I suspect he's right, that there was violations of grand jury secrecy. There was illegal leaking from throughout the Mueller team. It's almost without question that happened. Do you think Trump should plunge into this? Should he just put it behind him? Should he have Barr start taking a close look at exactly what the Mueller team did and see if anyone should be prosecuted? What do you think?
He needs to pardon General Flynn and maybe pardon He needs to pardon General Flynn 100% without question. Papadopoulos, he probably should pardon him. He's just some 28-year-old kid who got a date wrong. Oh, I thought I met somebody in July, and it turned out I met him in June. That was the most bogus case when I actually looked into that. Because you're a lawyer yourself, aren't you, Jack?
I am, yes, sadly. Sadly, yeah. Mike, like yourself.
Yeah, sadly. But it comes in handy, though, when you read these headlines and they say Papadopoulos lied to the FBI, and you go, why don't I pull up the court filings? And you pull up the court filings, and as a lawyer, you read them and go, wait a minute, he was arrested and charged because he said, I met some guy in July, but he actually met him in June.
Not a lot of people know. You're making a lot of news today. Not a lot of people realize the media has given Papadopoulos a very, very bad rap, and they have presented him as this evil, nefarious character when the whole obstruction stems from just the misstatement of the date in a deposition.
Yeah, it was such a dumb case that when I kept reading it, I thought I was the problem. I go, I must not be reading this correctly. This can't be right. This can't be the case. And sure enough, he got a date wrong. So Papadopoulos, he was collateral damage. He should be pardoned. Manafort, I don't know, man. Manafort was doing what a lot of people on K Street do, and they get away with. The Podestas aren't being prosecuted for. How did Tony Podesta? This is something I always ask people. Oh, who's Tony? Or who's not Tony Podesta? I'm sorry, the other brother.
John Podesta.
So Tony Podesta.
John and Tony.
So John and Tony, they were working with foreign governments. And Tony Podesta was chief of staff of the Clinton campaign while Tony was taking money from foreign governments. No charges against Tony Podesta.
Of course.
Got charged.
Not to mention the Clinton Foundation that sold, while she was Secretary of State only a few years ago, sold uranium, sold access. Probably the single most corrupt thing in American history, never even got looked at.
Right. So Trump needs to issue pardons for sure to Flynn, Papadopoulos. I don't know, maybe Manafort. Kind of send a message, but I'm not going to lose any sleep if he doesn't. I will, lose a lot of sleep if Flynn doesn't get that pardon for sure. And then order an investigation into foreign influence by the Clinton campaign. Let's look into Ukraine and Qatar and everyone else who has given Hillary Clinton all this money.
So where does the president go now? So he's got all this. It would seem to me he's got a lot of newfound political capital to use. What would you do if you were advising him, and you probably are? What would you tell the president? So you're at your Trump is at his high water mark. He's even higher than election night 2016. What does he do? Does he take all this capital and now really press for the wall and start taking the money from DOD and dare Congress to stop him? What does he do?
Oh, yeah. First of all, you crush your enemies. And the way you crush your enemies is in an aspirational way. You elevate the people they destroyed. You make Flynn whole. That is you want to rally the base. As you know, Jack, as a student of history and as a student of General Patton, is other than logistics, you need morale. The troops need morale. This is a big win. Everybody in Trump world is like euphoric. They're high right now. They feel so good. They feel like they finally got a win. You're going to have to capitalize on that. You can't just sit around and wait, right? It's just like if you have a good game in a football team, well, that's just one game, bro. You got a whole season ahead of you, and Trump has a whole season ahead of him, and he needs to think more like a coach. Okay, the base is fired up. What am I going to do? How am I going to keep these people motivated? All right, let's do this Flynn thing. Okay, let's just start taking really aggressive action on the wall. Let them sue me. Here's how you got to think if you're Trump. They're going to sue me anyway.
That's true.
Just do things that the base wants me to do. And then let me get sued. Let me get beleaguered in court. Let me get attacked because at least the base knows that I'm fighting. He does that, he wins in a landslide.
Do you think Trump, we talked about the pardons. Going back to Mueller for a moment. Larry Klayman's made a pretty good case that Mueller leaked a lot of grand jury stuff that's illegal. What should Trump do with that? Do you think he should fool with that, investigate that, push that behind him? What should he do specifically with the Mueller team?
Nah, this is going to be an unpopular thing for me to say, but I don't care.
That's all right. We do that.
Yeah, just move on. Just like when Trump had won, what I said he should have done, and in hindsight, this is what he should have done. And I said at the time, though, is right when he took office, he should have said, I'm going to give a full pardon to Hillary Clinton, and I'm pardoning everybody else for any and all activities involved in the election of 2016.
You know, Mike, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, the media would have squealed, and Hillary Clinton would have squealed. You should have just said this is a nasty point in history. Everybody's pardoned. Let's move on. And that's what he needs to do now. Is the beautiful thing, Jack, is I don't want to say this is a Pyrrhic victory for Trump because it is a real victory, but he won a war that he shouldn't have had to fight. He won a war that cost a lot of his people a lot of money and a lot of time and demoralized a lot of people and did a lot of damage. So even though he won it, there was ways to avoid it. And as a strategic thinker, he needs to think, what am I going to do to not get embroiled in something like this again? So the Mueller thing, yeah, they did their dirty work, but ultimately Trump got cleared. Move on. Focus on getting the ball downfield.
Now, do you think, what do the Democrats do? Now, House Democrats are really screwed. Now you've got Nadler and Schiff and Elijah Cummings and all these people. What do they do? What do you think their reaction is? Do they push on? Do they quietly forget about impeachment and the investigations? What do they do right now?
Well, they're losing their minds, and that's great. And that's what I mean by how Trump can crush the enemies. Just trigger them. Find ways to enrage them. They're all making mistakes now.
Yeah.
We even see that percolating down to Twitter and the mainstream media. Brian Stelter first defends the Russia collusion media coverage, which is not a smart thing, but he's now defending Jussie Smollett and saying, well, maybe Jussie Smollett was actually a victim. Maybe. and that's because their minds and there's cognitive psychology behind this. Their amygdalas have been rewired, and they can't handle any stress anymore. They can't any fight or flight response. They default to a freak out. And because of that, the Democrats are losing their minds. They're defending, killing babies essentially, which is bizarre. I remember I was a kid growing up. My family's very Christian. They're like, Democrats are baby killers. I'm like, come on, man, come on. No, that's just not true. And yet you have the governor of Virginia saying, well, if you cut the cord and leave the baby to die over on a table somewhere, what the hell?
Well, speaking of the governor of Virginia, that's a story for a different day. He managed to slip away from all his sins. Mike Cernovich, documentary filmmaker. His latest film, Hoaxed, about fake news, is available at hoaxedmovie.com. I am recommending it to the whole flock. Michael, thanks so much. If we're real lucky, we'll have you back. Time for March Madness. We're not going to talk tournament, but we're going to talk sports betting and how it is regulated. Should it be more regulated? How bad is the problem? Should the states be in it? Should the feds be in it? Should both be in it? Joining us now, Patrick Moran, perfect man for the topic. He's a lawyer at the Cato Institute, Center for Constitutional Studies. Patrick, welcome.
Good to be on, Jack.
So tell us, okay, so I mean, obviously March Madness is one of the most gambled sporting events of the year. Every year the volume seems to increase and increase. It's bigger than the Super Bowl. It's probably the biggest there is. We have this case, Murphy versus the NCAA. Tell us about that.
So basically what happened in Murphy, the NCAA, is that the federal government had this ban on sports gambling, right, from 1992 up until last year.
Right.
And the Supreme Court struck it down. They said that the federal government can't tell states how to write their own laws when it comes to something like sports gambling. So currently there's no federal ban. It's tossed back to the states, so they're making their own policy.
Now, let me ask you a question, though. For somebody who doesn't, I'm a lawyer, but I don't follow that stuff, how can I go and bet on the Steelers in Vegas? When I go to the sports book at the Bellagio, I can bet on my Steelers. How is that legal then? How does that work?
Well, it's different in different states. The original ban had certain states be exempt, like Nevada was one example of the state that was exempt. But right now what's happening is that different states are, kind of setting their own laws. So you have, 4 that were already exempt. 6 have legalized since the Murphy decision. 2 have passed bills to legalize. They're working out the kinks. And then 27 are working to legalize with different bills and amendments and things like that. And only 11 haven't seen any kind of bill. And that number's shrinking by the day. So this is a big topic right now.
Okay, so basically everything is back to the states. Each state can decide for itself what kind of gaming it has. But aren't there loopholes in this? Because how do people go onto these sites like youbet.com? Can't you always just bet on the internet or bet offshore or something like that? Is any of this even relevant in the age of the internet?
Well, it's a complex issue that hasn't been fully fleshed out. You have different states with different policies. So West Virginia and Delaware, for instance, both have online. Rhode Island only has legalized in-person bets at a couple different casinos. So it's the short answer to that is that it's a state-by-state issue now.
But what I'm saying is, doesn't the internet, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't understand it, doesn't the internet circumvent that? Because if you can just bet with some site in the Caymans, what does it matter what state is regulating what? Everybody will just do it online, right? What am I missing?
Well, a lot of these states are doing, well, not states rather, a lot of these sites are doing geolocation, so they're able to tell where you're placing your bets from.
And then they go after the site, or how do they do it? Or they go after you, or what? How do they enforce that?
Well, I'm not really sure how they enforce that particularly. Mostly what I've been focusing on with I guess this new area is what the leagues are doing, which is even more interesting.
Tell us about that. What are the leagues doing?
So they're trying to get a piece of the action, of course, and they're doing that through mainly two mechanisms. So they're proposing integrity fees and league data purchasing. So an integrity fee is basically, a league like the NBA saying sports betting is legal and we need 1% from every legal bookmaker to prevent cheating, to preserve, the integrity of the game. The problem with this is
they're taking a cut, so they say it's okay if we get a cut? That's funny.
Exactly. Yeah, so
that sounds like the mob. That sounds like the New York mob.
I'm with you on that one. That's exactly what it sounds like. So the problem with this, of course, is that black market sports gambling already happens, and legal gambling has been happening all along in Vegas. So they already have the means and the protocol to prevent cheating, and they don't charge Nevada these fees.
So the leagues, each league, basketball, football, baseball, it would seem to me, you're the expert, each is developing a complex web of their own regulations about what can be done, because you have the Pete Rose problem. Obviously, players and coaches aren't allowed to bet on their teams, but what about former players, this and that? What about minor league players? I mean, it would seem to me that everybody's now building out their own code of regulations about gambling. Is that what all the leagues are doing?
Well, yeah, the leagues are all doing different things. I mean, the big thing that's happening is, so you have the integrity fees. There's also this league data mandate. And they're trying to get that into bills in Congress, actually. So basically the idea of that is that they want bookmakers to buy the official scores of games and the results of every play directly from them, instead of just, getting it off of ESPN like normal people who watch the game. And they say that's to protect people from getting ripped off, but really they just want to force people to buy a product.
They want to make money. It sounds like the leagues want into the gaming business. It sounds like little by little, the leagues want to get into the gaming revenue and the gaming business.
They do, absolutely. They see it as a big source of revenue.
Now, the NFL has finally relented. Is the NFL going to do a team in Vegas now, after decades of saying, no, that's corrupt? Did I hear properly that there's an NFL team coming to Vegas? Do you know anything about that?
No, I haven't heard anything about that, actually, but that would be interesting to see.
I've heard, maybe this is inside information, I don't know, but I've heard that the NFL Owners Committee is now going to do, I've heard they're about to announce, or something like that, announce this year, that the next expansion point, I think they looked at Austin and they looked at Vegas, and they want to do Vegas, because there are already two teams in Texas, and I think Austin's too close to Dallas, but they want to do a team in Vegas. I guess the bottom line on all of this is, gambling is growing. And let me see if this is accurate. Gambling is growing, and because of the internet and technology, it is a force in a business that is rapidly moving beyond the ability of governments to regulate. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. I think that states actually have a great opportunity to regulate there for themselves. So, the question of legalized gambling has always been left to states, with this federal ban back in '92 as a lone exception. Even at points when casino gambling was highly regulated, it was banned in a lot of places. That was done at the state level rather than federally. So there's no reason why we should trust states with, casino gambling, lotteries, horse racing, but then doubt them on sports gambling. So in a lot of ways, this is similar. And you see different states, again, doing different things. So, certain states only allow in-person bets. So they attempt to control it in that sort of way. New Mexico, for example, did they pass it? I don't think they passed it, but there's a bill that was suggested that essentially you couldn't bet on in-state college basketball games. So it kind of tried to protect things there on that end. So
let me ask you this question as an expert. How rigorous is enforcement? Okay, so the case of Murphy versus NCAA kicks it back to the states. Supreme Court sends it back to the states. Certain states regulate, certain states don't. Some are complicated in the middle. How do they enforce this? I mean, is anybody really enforcing this, or do state legislatures just pass laws that are for public view and political purposes? Does anybody really enforce any of this?
Yes, I mean, they would. It's just like any other law. They would, if somebody's operating, let's say that it's not legal in a state and somebody decides that they're going to operate a casino that does sports gambling, they're probably going to get shut down. So it varies based on the state, because different states have different laws. They have different ways of doing things and enforcement. They have different priorities. But for the most part, if they have a bill to legalize and then it becomes legal, then, you don't have as much of a problem versus, when it is illegal, you have, well, first of all, big black market. so you can't tell, again, with the back to, I guess, the problem of, cheating in sports gambling. It's actually easier to track payments and catch cheaters when you have a legal market versus the black market, which is much harder to track.
Isn't it? Why don't, like my father was a huge gambler. He was actually a pretty successful gambler. Strange story, but he would bet on you couldn't get me to gamble $2. My dad probably bet on 25 college football games a weekend, and he did it for 40 years. But of course, he used his bookie. And isn't that in those days? I mean, he's World War II generation. That's what they all did. I mean, why don't people just do that now? I mean, I guess I don't see how you regulate any of this. How do you catch the bookies? I mean, I just have trouble understanding how this is enforced. Do people still use bookies? Have bookies gone away? Did states crack down on bookies?
Yeah, I mean, there are still bookies. I mean, the illegal betting market, and this was in '99, so this has only gone up when you factor in people doing things online or via text or however they do it. Somewhere between 80 and 380 billion a year in the U.S. So it's a big market, and it's still happening. So it's not something that's gone away. And I mean, in that, I guess, black market category, you actually include office pools. It's people. A lot of this is regular people, and people tend to forget about that. They think of it as some activity you go see a bookie. It might be in your office. You might be having an office pool, and that's it's very common. One in 5 people are betting on March Madness this year. So
1 in 5. So that would be, you're talking about like 60 million Americans, 60, 70 million Americans will bet on the tournament?
Yes.
And so presumably there aren't many women that do that. So if you have, you've got 160 million men and 180 million women or something in the United States. So that means that would really mean something like half the men in America are betting on the tournament. I mean, is that...
Sounds about right.
But then you throw out the children and the old people and you deal with the adult population. I mean, it sounds to me... If those numbers are true, a gigantic percentage of the adult male population in the States is betting on the tournament.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
Well, I guess, though, what we're talking about gambling, that could be somebody that kicks in $2 in the office poll, and then it could be somebody, a sick, betting $200,000, right? It says you have the sickies, exactly. And then you have somebody betting $1.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Boy, interesting. So where do you see all this going? Final question, your time remaining, Patrick. Where do you see all this going? I mean, okay, so the Supreme Court has ruled. Do you expect Congress to get into this? Will there be another clarifying Supreme Court ruling? Where do you see the legal topography moving forward?
So I think what's coming next is all dependent on Congress. So at the end of last year, Orrin Hatch and Chuck Schumer introduced a bill in the Senate to bring back federal regulation, and included in that bill were, the league data mandates, and Senator Hatch retired, so it didn't pass yet. So there hasn't been a new Republican sponsor for that bill yet. So it's really going to depend on if somebody wants to take up that mantle. If they don't, so I think for the foreseeable future, we're just going to see it on the state level, unless and until Congress decides to do something.
Patrick Moran, lawyer, Cato Institute Center for Constitutional Studies, great constitutional lawyer. Patrick Moran, you even know sports. Thank you for enlightening us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jack.
We'll see you again soon. Here we are. It's that time of the week again. Is there trouble ahead for the Obama administration? Michelle Obama, corruption. That's all coming up, and now we dive right into your questions. Alice in Michigan writes, Trump has been unleashed. Now the Mueller report has exonerated him. He's free to aggressively pursue his agenda. He's already going after Obamacare. What else can we expect President Trump to do? I think, number one, Alice, he's got to build the wall. He's already taken the first $500 million from the Pentagon to begin at least a couple square miles of the wall. It's going to take a lot more than that. The president now must fulfill his campaign promise. He must use this newfound political capital stemming from the end of Mueller to build the wall. Build the wall. That's the key. Now, listen, I want all of you, go to BehindTheCurtainRadio.com. Hit the podcast button, number one. Number two, jump into the ring and square off. Look at where it says square offs. I want you all to square off on those issues. Hit that podcast button and square off. Do not forget to do that. Now, moving right along. Oh, first of all, Bill, Mary, we got another Alice, and we have Manuel. Welcome to all of you. See on my screen here on Facebook, Paul in Atlanta now writes, Democrats may be disingenuous when they call for Mueller's full report to be released. But I know I'd love to see what it says. Trump has even said that he has no problem with it coming out other than the classified part. Well, the president's had a big win. I think the prudent thing here, although we'd all like to see it, if I were President Trump, I would tell the Attorney General, let's just let this issue go away. We don't need to fool with the report more. We don't need to. Democrats want a FOIA or subpoena. Let them do it. We'll deal with it then. Let them stay mired in this issue. We have a victory. Let's pick up our chips, leave the table, and start using that political capital. No good can come to Trump from looking at more of the Mueller report. My advice, move on. Now, make sure you hit the like button, and even more important, go to the website, BehindTheCurtainRadio.com, hit the podcast button, and jump in that ring and square off. Leah, in Florida, Democrats have started telling people that it's time to move on from the Russia collusion story and focus on their legislative agenda. They want the party to focus on impeachment and continue investigating Donald Trump. Well, here's what I say to them, Leah. Let them do that. It will only hurt them because now Democrats are double screwed. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Not only have they gone down this losing road, investing almost all of their political capital in Mueller and Russia collusion and impeachment. Now we see it's all a failure. They've gone down this terrible road, but they also, while they went down this road, failed to advance anything for those white working class voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, nothing. So they've wasted all their time on a losing issue. They have no platform. They're back to where Hillary was in 2016, which is a political disaster. Make sure now you got to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Jason in Colorado. First off, we welcome another Bill. We welcome a John, a Jack, and a Jesus. Welcome, guys. Jason in Colorado writes, the Russian conspiracy has torn this country apart, and it was one of many controversies and hysterias pushed by the media and has severely harmed the unity of America when coming together is so badly needed. You're right, Jason. Now that Mueller's report has been released and the media bias has been exposed, do you think healing will begin? Well, it could and it should, but we're just in one of these polarized times, much like the late 1850s. It's the 1850s all over again. Thank God we're not going to fight a real war. We're just fighting a rhetorical war. But the intensity of polarization is very much like it was in the 1850s. So sadly, I don't see healing for a while. Hopefully, if President Trump gets a second term, I think what will happen in 2024, whoever the country elects then, will be a president that will have an opportunity to unify the country. Trump doesn't have that opportunity right now. Now, remember, we're going to get into all these topics in greater detail on the podcast, so you got to get it. Ben in D.C. now writes, right here in Washington. Ben writes, it's being reported that Michelle Obama's chief of staff influenced prosecutors in Chicago to drop all of the charges against Jussie Smollett. She probably did. The evidence is growing. But does that surprise you? With all of the corruption by the Obama administration, does that surprise you? And Michelle Obama is very powerful and influential in Chicago, right? My God. And Obama, one of the Obamas on the phone. Imagine yourself. You're a federal prosecutor in the office in Chicago, and you get that call. That's like getting a call from the Queen. Of course you're going to drop the charges against poor Jussie Smollett, who staged. He should go to jail for 20 years. But, of course, he won't. We'll see you next time on Behind the Curtain.